I had always thought that this was just another routine evaluation, a mere checkbox in the long list of tasks that came with dedicating 7 years of my life to Cressman Industries. 7 years spent chasing deadlines in a flickering office, takeout containers piling up on my desk as I sacrificed sleep and personal time. I missed anniversaries, endured endless rainy commutes, and lost friendships without ever having the time to grieve them. All of this, I believed, was leading to something: a corner office, a meaningful reward, maybe even acknowledgement for everything I'd poured into this company. So, when I straightened my tie that morning and walked into the conference room with its cold, sterile walls and polished glass table, I braced myself for a typical review. Perhaps a checklist of goals, or maybe even a word of gratitude from the man at the head of the table, Frederick Langston, my father-in-law and the king of this corporate empire. But the moment his cold eyes met mine, I knew something was wrong. His face was unreadable, a stone mask with no sign of warmth or recognition. He sat there, hands neatly folded, with the Cressman logo gleaming on the tablet he didn't even bother to unlock. And then his voice came, a sharp, emotionless declaration that struck me like a physical blow. "We're letting you go. Performance issues." At first, I thought I had misheard him. The room seemed to tilt beneath me as I waited, hoping for some explanation, some courtesy, but it never came. Frederick just stared at me with a flat expression, daring me to argue. He spoke as if the blood, sweat, and tears I'd sacrificed for this company had evaporated the moment they no longer had a use for me. The HR manager, a woman who had once praised my work, slid a folder across the table: severance terms, confidentiality agreements, and a list of things I was no longer allowed to do or say. I walked out of the glass lobby carrying a cardboard box with nothing but a hollow, mechanical smile on my face. The handshakes were forced, the goodbyes empty, and the eyes of my colleagues didn't even meet mine. The cold winter air outside felt punishing, the harsh sunlight offering no comfort. For a moment, I stood there, breath misting in the frigid air, trying to understand how everything had unraveled so quickly, so neatly, as though I had never mattered at all. Still dazed, I climbed into my car, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, telling myself Elise would understand. My wife, my partner. She would be furious for me, reminding me that I was more than Frederick's verdict, that we would figure it out together. I replayed the conversation in my mind a dozen times on the drive, clinging to the hope that at least the one person who truly loved me would stand by me when the world turned its back. But as I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. The house stood silent, still, no welcoming lights, no warmth waiting inside. I opened the door, and there she was, Elise, standing like a statue by the door. Her bags were packed, efficient and tidy, as if she had been planning this moment for weeks. She didn't speak at first, just handed me a large envelope with clinical precision, like handing over a package to a stranger. I opened it with trembling hands, and inside I found divorce papers. Divorce papers, along with a separate letter voiding the prenup clauses she had quietly amended months ago. To drive the knife deeper, she handed me a brochure for a local homeless shelter and coldly told me, "I don't need you anymore. You're useless now." The word hit me like a gunshot, and in that moment, I saw the truth. She had never loved me. I had been a tool, a stepping stone for her ambitions, and once I had outlived my usefulness, I was discarded. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I still had enough dignity left to walk out the door without a word, carrying nothing but a worn duffel bag and a broken heart. I didn't even look back as I closed the door behind me. What was there to see? A hollow house, empty of everything that once felt like home. The evening sky bled into night as I trudged to my car, my breath coming in sharp, heavy clouds. I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel and staring into the darkness ahead. I could almost hear Frederick's smug satisfaction and Elise's cold triumph. They thought they had ended me. They thought they had taken everything. They were wrong. I turned the key in the ignition, and the engine rumbled to life beneath me. My hands were steady now. My mind, once clouded with disbelief, had sharpened into something clearer, colder. I didn't know where I was going or how I would get there, but I made a silent vow under the pitiless stars. They would regret underestimating me, and when they did, it would be too late. For the first time in 2 days, I allowed myself to stretch out and sink into something that vaguely resembled rest. My body ached from exhaustion, but it wasn't broken, not by a long shot. As I lay there, staring at the stained ceiling tiles above, a different kind of energy surged through me, sharp, focused, and cold. They thought they had broken me. They thought I had been gutted, left hollow and powerless. What Frederick, Elise, and everyone else failed to understand was that my time at Cressman Industries had always been a carefully crafted mask. What they saw as a mediocre performance was just part of a longer, more deliberate game, one they couldn't even begin to comprehend. Every spare moment I had, I spent building something far bigger, something real, hidden beneath layers of shell companies and anonymous entities. They never knew that I was the one pulling the strings. They had been too busy patting themselves on the back for standing above me to see the truth. I had quietly constructed the very empire they thought they controlled. What they didn't know was that I owned the consulting firm responsible for Cressman's biggest triumphs: the acquisitions, the mergers, the deals that elevated them all. Every major victory had been quietly orchestrated by me, behind the scenes, through proxies and intermediaries. While Frederick thought of himself as the grand architect, he was nothing more than a puppet, dancing on strings I had carefully pulled from the shadows. They thought they had cast me aside, dismissing me as irrelevant, too small to matter. They thought they had cleared the field for themselves, but in truth, they had unknowingly set the stage for me to act with complete freedom. I began to plan in that dim motel room, a place that felt as broken as I had once been. I propped a rickety chair under the door as a precaution, an old habit from a time when safety wasn't guaranteed, and I powered up a battered laptop salvaged from my car. My fingers flew across the keyboard, muscle memory taking over despite the exhaustion weighing down my bones. The first thing I did was secure my real accounts, those buried deep behind layers of offshore entities and numbered trusts. I rerouted every penny into liquid channels, making sure that anything even remotely tied to Cressman or Frederick's empire was severed, drained, and erased without a trace. They thought they had knocked me down, but they didn't realize they had thrown gasoline onto a spark. By the third night, I wasn't sleeping anymore. I didn't need to. The energy from shedding the chains of my past life coursed through me like wildfire. Every move I made was precise, calculated, and purposeful. I became a ghost in their world, slipping unnoticed through the walls of the empire they believed was invulnerable. I reached out to old allies, people who owed me favors, debts they hadn't repaid. We spoke in encrypted messages, on burner phones, in quiet corners where no one could overhear. One by one, I activated the networks they never knew existed. I began to freeze the flow of money Cressman relied on, cutting off the resources they thought were untouchable. The cracks in their foundation started appearing slowly at first. A delayed shipment here, a bounced wire transfer there. Just enough to plant doubt in the minds of their investors and suppliers. Frederick, ever the proud patriarch, would be too blinded by his own arrogance to notice the signs until it was far too late. Elise, obsessed with her carefully curated public image, would be too busy composing the next post for her social media accounts to see the ground shifting beneath her feet. Meanwhile, in that musty motel room, with nothing but a duffel bag and a laptop, I wasn't descending into despair. I was undergoing a quiet resurrection. The world had stripped everything from me: my house, my title, my marriage, my reputation. But what they didn't realize was that ghosts don't disappear. They haunt. And when the time came, Frederick and Elise would feel my presence like a cold, invisible hand on their shoulder, tightening around their empire until nothing remained but dust. This wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. I wasn't planning a dramatic return, no public breakdowns for them to savor. I didn't want their pity or validation. No, I simply disappeared from their sight, from their reach. I became a ghost, unreachable, untraceable, and most importantly, uncontrollable. While they believed they had won, I moved in silence, tightening the noose around their empire. I knew Frederick's every move, his every weakness, every crack in the facade he so carefully built. He had no idea how vulnerable he truly was, and without me to keep the system running smoothly behind the scenes, the cracks were beginning to widen. The more they celebrated their supposed victory, the more they sealed their own fate. As the days went on, I watched the machine I'd set in motion begin to hum quietly beneath the surface of their empire. It started with small, seemingly insignificant cracks: delayed payments, missed deadlines, things Frederick would have dismissed as mere glitches. Nothing more. He wouldn't see them for what they truly were: the first deliberate signs that the foundation beneath him was beginning to erode. I had already set my plan in motion, moving quietly behind the scenes, pulling the strings that would bring down the very empire they thought was untouchable. My actions were invisible, deliberate, and unhurried. Frederick, the so-called architect of Cressmont, never realized he was nothing more than a puppet, and Elise, ever the socialite, was too busy with her curated public image to notice the storm gathering on the horizon. Each day, I moved closer to the final act. With a few swift keystrokes, I froze their access to critical resources: software licenses, consulting services, anything that had once been the lifeblood of their operations. My old allies, people who owed me favors, were activated one by one, pulling strings in law firms, media houses, and regulatory agencies. I made sure Cressmont's key financial channels began to tighten without warning, until the air around Frederick and Elise grew heavy with doubt. The cracks widened slowly, deliberately, and when they finally took notice, it would be far too late to stop the flood that was already on its way. The real turning point came during what should have been a routine merger, an acquisition Frederick had been boasting about at every industry event. At the last minute, the partner company pulled out, citing concerns over corporate stability. Frederick must have been livid, pacing in his office, barking orders at his assistants. Elise, too, must have felt the weight of it, pretending everything was fine in front of her social media followers while texting Frederick in a panic. But the rot had already set in. The supply chain that Frederick relied on began to crack, and once loyal partners started backing out of long-term deals. Contracts that Frederick had treated as guarantees crumbled overnight, and investors who once praised his leadership began to whisper behind closed doors, questioning the financials they had never bothered to scrutinize before. Behind the scenes, I remained a ghost, silent, unseen, but everywhere. The emails from Frederick and Elise came at first, polite, almost apologetic, as if they thought they could reach out to me like I was some lost child. They even tried to extend a hand of supposed concern. But as their desperation grew, the tone shifted. The messages became more urgent, the phone calls more frequent. I discarded them easily, each missed call another small victory in my quiet war. They had no idea that the man they discarded wasn't wallowing in self-pity, but instead moving through their world like a shadow, methodically dismantling everything they had worked for. Elise, dear Elise, played her part exactly as I expected. She turned to social media, weaving a web of carefully crafted lies about how she was the victim, the wounded soul in a toxic relationship. Tearful selfies, long captions about moving on, photos of her bravely smiling at charity galas and on vacation, everything staged, hollow, and desperate. But beneath the surface, the truth was leaking out, and no amount of carefully curated posts or influencer events could save her from the consequences of her own actions. I let her spin her narrative, watching from the shadows as the world slowly peeled away the layers of her facade. As the truth started to unravel, the public turned their gaze elsewhere, and the sympathy she once courted began to evaporate. She became an afterthought, a warning to anyone who thought they could build a life on lies and manipulation. Her empire was crumbling, but it wasn't my victory she should have feared. It was the realization that the destruction she had caused was self-inflicted, a consequence of underestimating me. Beneath the polished surface of their frantic attempts to control the narrative, I could sense the desperation, the urgent need to spin a perfect story before the truth leaked out and shattered their flawless image. But no matter how many filters Elise applied to her posts or how many hashtags they used to mask the reality, nothing could save them from what was coming. Every move they made, every social media post Elise uploaded, every press release Frederick issued, was merely a part of my carefully orchestrated plan. I watched it all unfold from the shadows, knowing that each step they took toward damage control was pushing them closer to their inevitable downfall. I didn't need to ask for information. It came to me like blood seeping from an open wound. I had people in places they never considered: law firms, media agencies, regulatory bodies. My network was vast and quiet. I wasn't hiding. I was moving, pulling invisible strings that they couldn't perceive. As they celebrated their perceived victory, I was working silently behind the scenes, tightening the noose around their empire. Frederick's arrogance made him predictable. He blamed others, tightened control, but never adapted. Elise, too, followed her script, painting herself as the victim, spinning her fabricated stories for the public, trying to shield herself from the fallout. But neither of them saw that the real battle had already been lost. It wasn't about revenge. It was about watching them unknowingly construct their own demise. There's something almost poetic in allowing someone to build their own gallows, to watch them eagerly hammer in the nails and tie the rope, believing that they're in control, while you hold the scissors to cut it all down when the time is right. One day, during those early moments of their unraveling, I drove past Kresman's headquarters just to see it for myself. The building was still pristine, the flag still snapping in the wind, but I could feel the rot festering inside those walls. The atmosphere was thick with an impending collapse, an invisible weight pressing down on them. The first cracks became evident when a major partner company pulled out of an acquisition that Frederick had been boasting about. No explanation, just an abrupt email from their lawyers, citing concerns over Kresman's stability. Frederick, no doubt, was furious. I imagined him pacing his office, barking orders at his staff, demanding answers. Elise, ever the image-conscious socialite, was probably trying to maintain her facade in front of her followers, all the while texting him in panic, desperately searching for control. But the damage was already done. Suppliers, once loyal, began demanding upfront payments, while clients quietly backed out. The contracts that Frederick believed were immovable evaporated without warning. The investors, who had once hung on his every word, started to question everything, questions that had never been asked before. Kresman's empire began to crumble from within, but they were still too proud to see it. They were too focused on damage control to realize that the truth was already out. While they scrambled to save face, I remained silent, watching from a distance. I wasn't the one in panic. They were. I watched as Frederick's empire bled money, as his carefully constructed world of success became a series of blunders and backpedaling. His pride was his downfall. The more he tried to tighten his grip, the faster it all slipped away. By the time Elise tried to reach me, her 194th call, I already knew what was happening. I saw her name flash on my phone, and for a moment, part of me considered answering. Not because I missed her or wanted to hear her voice, but because I knew that this would be the moment she realized everything she had built, everything she had believed in, was falling apart. Still, I let it ring. I didn't need to hear her voice, not after everything. Instead, I watched as the world around her crumbled, and I sipped my coffee, satisfied that my plan was working exactly as it should. The collapse was swift, but it was never about me gloating or reveling in their misery. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had planned this, set it all in motion with precision, and now they were paying the price for underestimating me. Beneath the glossy surface of their desperate attempts to salvage their images, I could feel the panic rising. Elise, in particular, was frantic, scrambling to control the narrative before the truth slipped out and tainted the perfect life she'd spent years constructing. But no matter how many hashtags she used or how many filters she applied to her posts, nothing could shield her from the consequences of her actions. Each move they made, from Elise's emotional social media updates to Frederick's increasingly desperate press statements, only served to feed into my plan. I didn't need to ask for information. It came to me effortlessly, like a steady stream of whispers through my network. People who either owed me favors or had simply seen enough of Frederick and Elise's lies. I wasn't hiding. I was simply invisible, moving in silence while their empire crumbled. I wasn't interested in rubbing their faces in their fall. That would have been too small, too petty. I had bigger things to focus on. I wasn't out for vengeance. No, what I was building wasn't a response to them. It was my own creation. A silent reckoning was unfolding, one they couldn't see until it was far too late. I watched as the first signs of their collapse appeared. Subtle at first, with small financial discrepancies and delays in shipments, things that Frederick would have easily ignored. But each small crack was a calculated move. The rot had already begun deep within their empire, and soon it would spread. The tipping point came when Frederick's latest, much-hyped merger collapsed at the last moment. The partner company withdrew, citing concerns over Cresmont's stability. Frederick must have been furious, pounding his fists against his desk, demanding answers, yet no one had any. Elise, ever the image-conscious influencer, tried to spin it, maintaining her social media presence and hoping the public would buy into her perfect facade. But behind the glossy photos and curated captions, the cracks widened. Suppliers started pulling out, clients demanded audits, and even investors who had once adored Frederick were now questioning everything. The house they had built was rotting from the inside out. Meanwhile, I remained silent, watching from a distance. I didn't need to lift a finger. Their panic was all the proof I needed that the game was over. I wasn't interested in winning through grand gestures. I wasn't interested in Elise's tear-filled social media posts or Frederick's angry rants. I wasn't going to chase their apology or bask in their regret. What I wanted was to watch them collapse under their own weight, their arrogance turning to dust as they realized too late that they had underestimated me. Elise's world, once filled with adoration, began to shrink. Her followers grew silent, her brand partnerships dissolved overnight, and her carefully curated life slipped through her fingers like sand. No one came to her rescue, not the friends she thought she had, not the PR agents who once pampered her. Her desperation became palpable, and as the truth about her manipulations began to leak out, her carefully constructed world began to crumble. I didn't have to do anything. The truth did all the work for me. Weeks later, I learned that Elise had come looking for me. Word spread that she had shown up at the same dingy motel where I had stayed in the beginning, pounding on doors, calling my name like a desperate soul. But I wasn't there. While she raged at ghosts, I was sitting in a high-rise office, miles away, in a room filled with investors, people who understood power and value, who had seen what I had built and wanted in. Elise had thrown me out, thinking I was weak, but she had no idea what I was capable of. What they all didn't know was that I had already moved on, building something far bigger than anything they could ever touch. I didn't look back. I didn't care about the noise they were making. Elise's downfall wasn't my concern anymore. She had made her choices, and now she was living with them. I had no time to revisit the past. There were new ventures to pursue, skyscrapers to build, partnerships to forge. If Elise's name popped up in the news, I skipped over it as if it were any other irrelevant headline. She was nothing to me now, just another footnote in my story, a warning to anyone who underestimated what I could accomplish. As for Frederick, his grand empire, built on borrowed time and stolen ideas, was falling apart, piece by piece. I didn't need to be the one to tear it down. It was already happening. His empire was held up by illusions, by pride, and by the image of invincibility. But illusions shatter, and the truth has a way of bringing everything to the surface. Frederick and Elise didn't even realize they were drowning. I was already watching from the sidelines, satisfied not by their misery but by the knowledge that they had done this to themselves. For years, Frederick had walked through life with a sense of invincibility, believing that no one could touch him. His arrogance had been his armor, his weapon, and it served him well, until it didn't. What he didn't realize was that his pride, which had once made him feel untouchable, was becoming brittle. His empire, built on arrogance and hollow praise, had already begun to crumble long before he noticed. It wasn't an explosion, but rather a slow, painful bleed. The banks were the first to turn against him. Institutions that once fought for a seat at his table began issuing demands instead of invitations. Letters that once carried the formal tone of corporate diplomacy now arrived with urgency. Lines of credit frozen, repayment clauses triggered, audits requested. At first, Frederick must have believed it was a mistake, a minor glitch. He likely stormed his office, barking orders and demanding explanations, thinking it was all some misunderstanding. But the truth was more brutal. Money doesn't make mistakes. It follows fear, and the financial world had sensed Cresmont's vulnerability long before he did. Then came the investors, the ones who had once clinked glasses with him, toasting his so-called visionary leadership. Now they arranged private meetings without him, emergency sessions where whispers of instability circulated. The loyalty he had relied on evaporated as quickly as spilled wine on a hot sidewalk. It all came to a head when the board, in an unscheduled vote, finally issued their verdict. No amount of Frederick's bravado could save him. He had to step down, but not out of dignity, out of survival. His resignation was a forced move, designed to stave off lawsuits and investigations. Even with his crown stripped away, he reached out to me. His final message came on a rainy Thursday, the number I knew by heart flashing across my screen. I didn't answer. I let it ring, letting his desperate voice go unanswered, just like everything else. His plea for a conversation wasn't an apology. It was the hollow, defeated cry of a man who realized power lost could never be reclaimed by simply asking for it. I imagined him in his grand, empty house, surrounded by the remnants of his former life. The chandeliers now seemed cold and out of place, casting harsh light over rooms devoid of meaning. The designer suits he no longer had reasons to wear filled the closet, and the grand oak desk, once a symbol of his authority, now gathered dust, covered in unpaid bills and legal notices. I didn't need to say a word. My silence spoke louder than any victory speech could. Frederick had spent his entire life building walls, thinking they would protect him, but in the end, they became his prison. He had miscalculated everything, not just the market, not just the loyalty of his investors, but me. He had mistaken my patience for weakness, my loyalty for stupidity. He had spent his whole life battling men who charged at him head first, never realizing that the greatest threat was the one who played the game quietly, who worked from the shadows, and then dismantled everything with a single calculated move. I didn't celebrate Frederick's downfall. Real victories don't need to be celebrated. They don't taste like champagne or gunpowder. They taste like the crisp air after a storm, sharp, clean, filled with possibility. It was the satisfaction of standing at the edge of a new world, one that was mine to shape. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, letting the rain wash over me as I walked away from the cafe where I had listened to his desperate voicemail. The city stretched out in front of me, alive with new beginnings, new deals, new challenges. As I moved forward, Frederick Langston, once the titan of his empire, was left behind, staring into the ashes of everything he thought he had built. What they didn't know was that the pawn they thought they discarded had never been a pawn at all. I had always been the architect of their undoing. The world would soon know me as Julian Blackwood, the man who rose from the ashes of their attempts to bury me. No more masks, no more shell companies. I stepped into the light, unveiling Vanguard horizons to the world. What had started as a quiet game was now a full-scale operation, far bigger than anything Cressmont had ever been. At the press conference, the cameras flashed as I stood at the podium, calm and deliberate, the new logo of Vanguard shimmering behind me. It wasn't just a consultancy firm. Vanguard was a force, precise, relentless, and built to outmaneuver the old system, not survive within it. Headlines poured in. Phantom genius reshapes industry. Unknown power broker unveils Vanguard horizons. Tech giants back new consulting titan. I didn't correct them. I didn't need to explain where I had been or why no one had heard of me before. The mystery fed the momentum. People are drawn to shadows, to stories half told, and I gave them just enough fuel to keep the fire burning. The first deals came in weeks. Major tech firms, real estate moguls, private equity groups. They all came to me, drawn not only by the results I could deliver, but by the chance to be part of something bigger, something inevitable. Every deal I closed didn't just build Vanguard. It erased another piece of the empire that had once tried to erase me. As I sat across from billionaires in sleek conference rooms, discussing plans that would ripple through industries for decades, I realized something Elise would never understand. You don't rebuild by clinging to what was lost. You rebuild by becoming something so much larger, so much stronger, that the old wounds can't even reach you anymore. The clients who once swore loyalty to Frederick's empire now sought me out in waves. They came to me not just for the results I could deliver, but for the chance to be part of something real, something inevitable. They realized that the success they had attributed to Cressmont wasn't truly theirs. It was mine all along. One by one, the pillars that held up Cressmont's power began to crumble. It started slowly. Late-night emails, hushed conversations in the back rooms of galas and retreats, CEOs and founders recognizing that the man behind their most successful deals wasn't Frederick Langston, but the one they had cast aside. The word spread, quietly at first, then like wildfire. It wasn't just about the work I did. It was about the opportunity to join something that would rise above the old, outdated system. They saw the potential in me, and they aligned themselves with it. As I built Vanguard Horizons, the world around me started to change. The city skyline I had once viewed with longing, while slaving away in a borrowed office, began to transform. New towers, new developments, all bore the subtle imprint of Vanguard. It wasn't just about making money. It was about creating something permanent, something that would outlast the hollow structures that Frederick had built. Every project I took on wasn't just about growth. It was about dismantling the old order piece by piece. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to flaunt my success. Frederick and Elise's worlds had already shrunk to the point where they no longer mattered. Even if they screamed my name into the wind, it would have no effect. They were irrelevant. Meanwhile, Elise's world was shrinking. The carefully curated social media posts, the magazine covers, the glamorous lifestyle, all of it was falling apart. Her influencer status vanished overnight. She launched a lifestyle brand, but it failed before it even had the chance to breathe. Her desperation seeped into everything she did, from trying to control the narrative to trying to manipulate the people she once thought would stay loyal. But the truth had already leaked out. She had been playing a game she could no longer win, and the public, once enamored by her perfection, turned their gaze elsewhere. One night, several months later, I was sitting at a small cafe reviewing notes for a new project when I saw her, Elise. She stood hesitantly in the doorway, her hand gripping her handbag like a lifeline. I could see the shift in her. The confident, poised woman I had once known was now a shadow of herself. Her steps were unsure, her appearance no longer flawless. She had tried to maintain her image, but the cracks were too wide. She wasn't the woman who used to walk into rooms with authority. Now she moved toward me with uncertainty. When she reached my table, I didn't speak. I simply watched her. She sat down, setting her bag on her lap like a shield, and I let her make the first move. She looked at me, searching for the man she thought she knew, the man she had built and discarded as if I were just another tool to serve her purpose. But I wasn't that man anymore. He had been erased. She stammered, her voice cracking, and I could see the regret in her eyes. "I made a mistake," she whispered, her tears starting to fall. "I thought I was doing what was best for me." I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I just let her try to pull me back into the past. She finally managed. "I miss you. We can start over. I've changed." The familiar scent of her perfume wafted across the table, the same fragrance she wore the night we first met at a Cressmont gala. It was the same scent that once made my heart race, the same scent that had twisted my stomach with longing. But now it was a weapon, a reminder of everything that had fallen apart. She was trying to tether me to a memory that no longer existed, but I wasn't that person anymore. I set my coffee cup down carefully, folded my hands on the table, and leaned in just slightly. "You fell in love with a mask you created for me, Elise," I said, my voice calm, controlled. "You never loved the real man. You loved the version of me that suited your ambitions, the one you thought you could shape." She shook her head in protest, but I raised a hand, silencing her. She knew, deep down, that I was right. The person she had once known had disappeared, and the person sitting across from her now was someone she could never control again. "The man sitting across from you now," I said, my voice unwavering. "You don't even know him anymore. You never bothered to know him." The truth hung in the air, sharp and final. I could see her crumble in real time, her shoulders sagging, her eyes filling with disbelief as the last of her carefully constructed defenses shattered. The words she had practiced, the arguments she thought would bring me back, all fell away, useless. In that moment, she understood. There would be no turning back. No second chances. No reset button. What we had was not some dormant thing waiting to be reignited. It was long gone, burned to ash by her betrayal. I stood up slowly, gathering my tablet and jacket, my movements deliberate. She stared at me, blinking rapidly, as if she couldn't comprehend that I was walking away. She probably believed that, with the right words, the right apology, I would stay, that things could somehow be fixed before it was too late. But life doesn't work that way. Not for people like her, not anymore. With a final, quiet nod, I tucked the chair back into place and left her there, alone in a sea of strangers who didn't care who she was or who she used to be. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. As I stepped into the daylight, the world felt clearer, sharper. The city around me moved on, indifferent, and I felt no anger, no triumph, only an overwhelming sense of freedom. I had already said everything I needed to say, not with words, but with the life I had built without her. The old life, with its betrayals and chains, was gone. What I felt wasn't some dramatic victory. It was the quiet satisfaction of having let go. I had walked away from the past, and it no longer held me. The freedom to create, to shape my future, had become my true victory. And in that, there was peace, a peace that no amount of betrayal could steal from me. I didn't seek the spotlight, nor did I crave recognition. My penthouse was understated, elegant, but not ostentatious. My clothes were tailored, but not flashy. I didn't need grand gestures or public validation. True power doesn't announce itself with flashing lights or applause. It moves quietly beneath the surface, unnoticed by those too caught up in their own vanity to see it. The power I wielded was patient and inexorable, slowly reshaping everything around me, quietly carving its mark on the world. I didn't have trophies to display. Instead, I kept a small study at the heart of my home, lined with dark wood and books that grounded me, that reminded me of the generations who had fought in silence. I spent many nights there, staring out at the city below, pondering the journey that had brought me to this point. Would I have chosen it if I had known the cost? Would I still have loved Elise, trusted Frederick, believed in a world that rewarded loyalty? Perhaps. But I understood now that part of strength isn't erasing the past. It's carrying it with you like a scar, something that once hurt but no longer defines you. I wasn't the man they tried to break. I was the one forged in the fires they lit around me. The man they thought would crumble became the one who stood tall, unshaken. There was a freedom in that they would never know. As time passed, I received letters, offers, invitations to return to the games I once played, high-profile events, exclusive memberships, roles for a figurehead to stand in front of the crowd. But I declined them all, politely, firmly. Let others chase titles and headlines. I didn't need to stand in the spotlight when I could move the world from the shadows. In the end, that was my legacy, not in loud declarations or grand gestures, but in quiet, undeniable power. A force that reshaped industries, influenced boardrooms, and moved billions without a single headline. I didn't care about their ruin, about Frederick or Elise. Their downfall was inevitable the moment they chose betrayal over loyalty. The world had already forgotten them, their names fading into silence. And somewhere, late at night, when the city hummed with life, I knew that Frederick and Elise, wherever they were, still felt the echoes of what they had lost. I was the shadow they thought would vanish, but shadows never disappear. They linger, they grow, and they become the foundation upon which new empires rise. As I sat in my chair, the city below like a living, breathing entity, I smiled. Not in triumph, but in understanding. The legacy I had created was not one of bitterness or revenge. It was a legacy of resilience, of survival. It was built in silence, in the spaces where they had tried to erase me. And, like the city skyline before me, it would continue to grow long after they were gone. Because that was the real victory, the quiet force that shaped the future, leaving the past to fade into oblivion.